Okay. Captain America, 1990, directed by Albert Pyun, starring a plethora of well-known actors. Matt Salinger, is that right? He's the nephew of J.D. Salinger, so that's kind of fun. We've got a bunch of let's see, we've got Ned Beatty shows up. We've got let's see, Ronnie Cox, Darren McGavin. Oh my gosh, Melinda Dillon is in here. So that's a Christmas Story kind of reunion. And then just Michael Nuri. Yeah, some of these names I was like, what? Like in this? So anyway, so John, we want to welcome back to the pod Jason from Binge Movies. This is his fault.
Welcome, Jason.
And so we want to obviously we can skip, because he's been on for we had a great conversation, or at least I had a great conversation with him on Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a great, again, Jason bending my mind with the whole Spielberg isn't really as relevant as he once was, and that's something to kind of fight against. But as always, Jason's like, damn it, he's right. So
then he put out Fabelmans and it flopped, and everyone was like, why did nobody watch Fabelmans?
Right. So it fit right in with your premise there. So all right, so we'll kind of skip the formalities since you've been on before, and I just want to, if you can give us a rundown of what's happening with Binge Movies and why people should run on over there. What's been going on with you?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me back on. I'm glad Johnny can be here this time. Last time I gave him a hard time, having never met him, for not being here.
Yep.
But now Johnny is here, so Johnny
knows. Wait, what? Hey, Ruth, what? No, it's Jason from Binge Movies. Jason from Binge Movies.
Yeah.
Aaron never talks about him. Okay.
So since we're face to face, sort of, I will be nice to you, but I will be mean to Lundberg.
Sure.
I will say that I think Matt Salinger is J.D. Salinger's son.
Oh, son. Okay.
Yeah.
Even worse.
Yeah. So that I just will actually you on your own show. Well, actually, but honestly, I'm doing you a kindness because I'm just saving you comments on YouTube. So
sure. Yep.
Somebody will be like, well, actually, and then, that's how the internet works. Binge Movies. What can I say about it? It's a weird show. Most of my life is spent watching movies, voluntarily or involuntarily, for one reason or another. Primarily because a shadowy corporation somewhere in the Buena Vista, California area is preparing for the end times. And they believe that human existence will end and that the old gods will return and they will need entertainment in the future. And they want to create a sort of proprietary list of the greatest films ever made. And so that's what I do. And when I'm not doing that, that's my primary job, unpaid, of course. I don't remember how that started, when that started, why that started. That is also kind of my best guess as to what is happening. So there's a little bit of conspiracy theory and conjecture in there. I've never had all of those details confirmed. But after spending most of my life in an underground bunker, during peak COVID, I was assigned to become an assistant manager, and then eventually I got promoted to manager of a video store in Akron, Ohio. And COVID was a great boom period for us because even though we were on a mandate lockdown, nobody abided by that. So hordes and hordes and hordes of massless, some would say insurrectionists, I just refer to them as our customer base, aka Ohioans, came into the store, rented everything we had. The good folks at Buena Vista, California, saw that, hey, there's a future in physical media. And again, conspiracy theory time. But you know how all these movies are starting to disappear from streaming services?
Yeah.
You've got us to thank.
Oh,
once they figured out that they could just rent the physical discs to people and again and again and again, well, what the heck is just putting it up on a streaming service? Why would you put millions of hours of content for $9 when you can charge half as much of that for 2 hours of content? Doesn't make any sense. And so once they figured out the numbers didn't make any sense, it began to change. And so if you've been looking for your favorite movies in a streaming service and haven't been able to find them, you're welcome.
Doing the dark movie overlords work. We appreciate that.
Yes, that's what I refer to them as. I refer to them as the dark movie overlords. And so what that really accounts to, and Lundberg knows this as the villain of our show, um, what that really sort of how you would sum that up is we have seasons. Our seasons are a year, and within each season we have 4 series. So we have quarterly series, and so we basically watch and rank with myself and guest filmmakers, film critics, film fanatics, film reviewers, film snobs, film weirdos, and we go through about 25 films at a time per series. And at the end of that, we have a little thing called Last Movie Standing, which Lundberg competed in most of last year, 2022, before he was finally dethroned at the expense of Casablanca being eliminated from film history. And the winner of those Last Movie Standing debates gets their movie selected and entered into the vault, for which the old ones are going to watch for eternity. So what we're really doing is we are storing up for the devils in the darkness treasures in heaven. You understand what I'm saying? We are storing up not for ourselves treasures in heaven,
Of course,
but for those who will truly inherit the earth, who are not the meek. And there's nothing meek about these forces at work. So it's a weird life, but I can't say I enjoy it, but I am living it.
That's your existence, right? That's your whole existence out there in Akron, right?
Okay. Oh yeah. I manage a video store, which is mostly just me getting lowly paid teenagers to try to stock shelves, clean toilets. And here's the thing, like people hear that and they think that like some kind of a gimmick or something, like, oh well, it's like kitsch, it's pop, and ha ha ha, it's all VHS. And while we do have an extensive VHS collection, and I have a growing personal VHS collection behind me, that's not primarily what we deal in. We're primarily in 4Ks, Blu-rays. We've got CEDs, DVDs, HD VHS. We've got every single available format, known to man and unknown to man. So you name it, we got it.
Well,
we got the hits.
Yeah. That's impressive. Johnny's mind is I can see his brain leaking out of his ears there. So
yeah, it's all thanks to our patent and technology. It's a little hush hush, but let's just say time isn't what it used to be now that we're done with it.
Yeah,
copyright and IP law does not apply across dimensions.
No, it's too complicated, like contracts. I think that you have to worry about.
Oh yeah,
that, right?
Like the whole world is excited as we record this. We're on the precipice of Barbie Mania, potentially. Yep. At least according to film Twitter. We'll see if real people give a shit. But film Twitter is like, oh my god, Barbie Mania.
Yeah.
Penny Marshall directed a Barbie live action adaptation with Demi Moore and Val Kilmer in 1987. We've got it here on the shelf.
What was the name of that one?
Barbie.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. And so we don't have to pay the copyright holder anything for that, because it doesn't apply to our situation in time and space. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure do. Okay.
They just reach next door, grab a movie off the shelf, put it on our shelf, boom. So everybody's all excited about it. I already saw it. It came out 40 years ago. It's okay. Yeah. It's all right.
So you're basically you're just whittling all these down for these dark movie overlords that can have entertainment once they come and they take over. And I think you guys just added one to your vault, right?
The Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings Two Towers.
Which is interesting because just previously the Fellowship of the Ring was in. I thought that was a very interesting kind of event. So what's going to happen is when it comes down to Return of the King is that if
my recommendation is, so the vote, what happens is the debate, as you know, Darren, the debate happens.
Right.
And then it goes to Twitter, and then it goes, we've added a new wrinkle to it. So Twitter gets, one vote on Twitter counts as one vote. Our patrons, they have 2 times voting power, and our elite patrons, who are the top tier of our patron supporters, they get 3 times voting power. That all gets calculated, and whatever the people vote for, and whoever the people think won the debate, that's the movie that gets selected and goes into the vault. I have nothing to do with it. I put movies on a list. Our guest put movies on a list, and then whoever's there at Last Movie Standing has to make their case. I think it would be, should the Lord of the Rings as an entire trilogy, it would be the only entire trilogy or entire franchise, I don't count The Hobbit, that would make it in to the vault. Already now, we've got a tie with Spielberg, who you brought up before, because Peter Jackson has 2 movies in the vault. Spielberg has 2 movies in the vault, Saving Private Ryan and Jurassic Park. John Woo was just eliminated from cinematic history. Goodbye, Johnny. Not this Johnny, the other Johnny. Goodbye, Mr. Woo, which I was sort of heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I would just recommend maybe not putting the Return of the King in, because the evil eye made of fire and Mordor, spoilers, loses in the end.
Yeah.
And I don't think that a bunch of similar sort of entities are going to watch that movie for all eternity and be reminded of, seeing basically themselves lose. That doesn't make sense.
No. Well, that's an interesting turn of events, because you've got that, but then you've also got the idea that the Return of the King, which is like the most revered maybe of all those movies, like, if it doesn't make it in, like, that's the conundrum. It's like, well, it's obviously not, like, it's not as good as the other 2. So you have to fight with that, and you have to
that's right. It's the Peoples Canon. Yeah. And we have the AFI, and we've got Criterion Collection, and we have all these different Sight and Sound and all these different lists of what basically the film snobs and academics and ivory tower folks think the best movies of all time are. I want to know what the home video faithful, the video fanatics, the video store maniacs, the people who actually watch movies and spend money on movies instead of going to screens for free during press credentials they don't deserve. I want to know what actual hardworking blue collar consumers think about movies. We're creating the People's Canon. We don't give a shit what anybody else says. And so far, people love the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Over and above Harry Potter. Not a single Harry Potter film has been in, and they've been in contention. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So here we are now talking about Albert Pyun.
Right. Well, Johnny, what did you have any questions before we go for Jason, before we go ahead and
which types of films have been dropping lately?
What do you mean?
Like your episodes, the type of episodes?
Yeah, the episodes.
Well, we're in the throes of VHS summer, the mega rays of VHS summer. And so we have completed summer camp movies with Kevin R. Brackett from Real Spoilers. And everything beyond that, I don't remember, because I'm already recording what's coming up next and is yet to come out.
Yeah.
And I'm doing a bunch of guest appearances and a bunch of Patreon content. So I don't know, but you can find our show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever your podcast can be found. Some episodes eventually make it to YouTube. Sometimes they get copyright striked for putting a trailer in a fucking episode.
Yep, we experienced that as well.
Yeah. And you can find us pretty much everywhere. So my brain is fried because all I do is watch movies. I'm so sorry, Johnny. You threw me a softball and I just don't have it in me anymore. I'm sorry.
Well, you've mentioned rankings and different retrospectives, and then obviously like this Albert Pyun guy. You're doing a retrospective on him, correct?
Yeah, that's on Patreon. That's a Patreon exclusive, although I did release the very first sort of prologue-ish, basically Albert Pyun's 80s output on the main feed a few months after it had come out on Patreon. On Patreon, at a certain tier and above, I do these little audio essays, essentially, that are basically, if you like video essays, it's that without video. I don't know how else to put it. No. We call them special features. And I essentially do like a deep dive, galaxy brain, connecting tissue. And with Pyun, it's a little bit different because he was a very workman-like director who pretty much just worked on whatever he was assigned. And I think at his max output, he was averaging about 3 to 4 films a year.
Yeah.
So to say like, okay, like it's hard to say that he is an auteur, but it's also hard to say he's not, because he has a very distinctive style. And the hardest part about Pyun is his style the result of the limitations of his budgets, or is it an actual aesthetic choice? And that's what I don't know. His earlier work that I already highlighted on that, which you can find on our main feed, we're calling the whole series Across the Pyun-iverse. It's over 42 films in 3 decades. It's going to take me probably 2 years to get through it all. And unfortunately, like, nobody cares about Albert Pyun, so I don't know what this endeavor is worth. That's also part of the reason why I'm doing it. because he's one of the most prolific directors during the home video revolution, outside of like a Charles Band. I began, I don't want to get too far into it, but I began the retrospective on him in the 80s with comparing his career when he got started the exact same year that James Cameron got started. And they both directed films the same year. And who grossed more money and who got more projects offered to him and who got fired from that movie before it was finished. Yeah. And Cameron got fired and Pyun got a bunch of offers. And Pyun becomes with these interesting characters, because when Marvel is sort of selling off all of its rights to all of its movies, all of its characters for movies and television and cartoons and whatnot, basically just to keep the doors open, the lights on, because the comic book business is in the shitter and they're going to go bankrupt. The only thing they can do is sort of sell rights off. They're selling it to anybody. They're selling it to the highest bidder. And DC is honestly not in that much of a different position, because we go from Warner Brothers being responsible for the Superman movies, and by the end of the 80s, Canon, of all people, has the rights because of the Salkinds to the Superman films. And the same thing is true here. This isn't a Canon film. It's a 21st century film, which is Menahem Golan, who's half of Golan-Globus, aka Canon, aka the Canon Film Group. And if you want to know more about them, there's multiple documentaries about them, and you should watch all of them, including the one they produced about themselves. They're absolutely wild freaking people. But somehow they came into the rights. Canon came into the rights for Captain America. And when Canon went bankrupt, basically at the end of the 80s, early 90s, Menahem somehow brokered the rights for Captain America for his brand new film company, which was 21st Century Pictures or 21st Century Films. And this was supposed to be kind of like the big, hey, we're here, we're making big movies, and I'm back, that kind of a thing. Yeah. And Pyun had directed several films. He was sort of their go-to guy. They had a handful of go-to guys, and he was one of them. And anything that was fantasy related, anything that was sort of high concept, really sci-fi, it always went to Pyun. And one of the things he was famous for, and this is like give Roger Corman a run for his money, is they'd have a kind of a high concept movie, Albert Pyun, for Canon or whoever he was working for, and then they'd take literally the leftover film, physical film, whatever had not been used and exposed for that production, the trimmings essentially, and they'd make another movie out of those trimmings using the same sets and oftentimes the same actors, and he would just write the plots pretty much like on the spot while he was filming the other movie. And so for the budget of one movie, he'd direct 2 or 3 films. Wow. And even his main movies, I mean, the budget for this film that we're going to talk about, this estimated, according to Wikipedia, at like $3 million. I could sort of believe that because of the names of the people who are involved, but I'm not 100% sure that $3 million all went to this movie. They may have spent $3 million, but I wouldn't be surprised if you'd have to go back into Pyun's filmography and go, well, what else did he make in 1990? And because I think he made 2 or 3 other films that year, and I bet you if they were with the 21st Film Group, and the other thing that he would do too is he would shoot a movie on somebody else's dime and then sell it to somebody else. He's like, oh, I directed this movie, and he get distribution through somebody else. So, I mean, we're talking about real ingenuity, I guess, frugalness.
Well, it's working the system, right?
Yes.
It takes a talent, and obviously the Golan-Globus, or wow, how many movies did they produce and just ran it into the ground just because just overdid it and overestimated everything. So yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you, like the thing you're talking about with nobody knows him, but I think, or not enough people know him, even though he's like low budget stuff, right? And your conversation that you had in the sexploitation episode with our common friend Brian Scuttle, you're talking about challenge yourself, go out there and don't just watch the franchise stuff, go out there and witness all these other like kind of facets and pockets of the filmmaking process and of like the different flavors that you can find. Don't just limit yourself. And I mean, I don't know if he's ever made a good movie, but like you said, he's a workhorse. And there's definitely something to learn from the way that he marketed himself and the way that he filmed. You know what I mean? I mean, it's important to learn that stuff. It's not just stick to the big budget things.
Well, here's the other thing too, is like when you watch these films, film genres, filmmakers who sort of have fallen through the cracks of history or are beginning to, you actually you get a broader context for those franchise films, which can either deepen your appreciation for some of them because you go, oh wow, like I see the level of craftsmanship that went into this, that took a B movie plot that I've now seen 10 times straight to video and really made it into something profoundly moving and engaging and whatever. Or also you begin to recognize of like, oh well, there's some of these, how do I put this? Art always sort of works this way where the most innovative stuff always happens in the margins and then moves towards the center, which is what we would call the mainstream. And then that becomes what is avant-garde becomes conventional. So the reason to watch genre movies and exploitation movies is because ironically, that's typically where the avant-garde is. Now you got to weed through a lot of trash oftentimes, but even in the trash, you'll find things that you go, oh, wait a minute. Somebody saw this and they knew of this and they were like, we could do something like that and do it better.
Yeah.
They're like the classic example from Pyun himself is a movie he's going to make about 2 years after this one, which is Nemesis. And Nemesis is almost like an unofficial William Gibson adaptation, but not in the style of Blade Runner, more so in the style of what would eventually become The Matrix.
Yeah.
It's characters, it's agents in suits with earpieces being communicated to. It's blending cyberpunk with Hong Kong action. What it really is blending William Gibson with John Woo. And the main character looks like Leon from The Professional before The Professional is made. And there's a scene where he goes, well, there's multiple scenes. There's a scene that's completely lifted from Albert Pyun. It's put into Underworld, the first Underworld, where she shoots the ring around herself and goes to the floors. Yeah. Albert Pyun did that 10 years previous. And he did it practically, no CGI.
Yeah.
Stunt people. There's a scene where the character goes flying down this chute and backwards and is firing guns, rapid firing guns. And when he gets to the end of this chute, it's down a hill that they actually built. And it's the real actor going down. And there's an agent following them down the chute and they're firing at each other. You go, wait a minute, this was like The Matrix. And when the shot hits, when he hits the ground, he stops, he's got his gun. It's the exact same shot composition as when Trinity jumps through that window in the beginning of the movie, tumbles down the stairs, turns over and has her guns pointed. Yeah. It's the exact same frame. And what you realize, and obviously like The Matrix is a pastiche of Ghost in the Shell and Akira and William Gibson and Cyberpunk and so many other things. We know that. But it's also, there's Nemesis in that movie. And the Wachowskis are of that VHS video store generation. They're like the Kevin Smiths and like the Tarantinos who sat and watched every conceivable type of movie. I mean, that was their thing. They just watched every action movie. They loved Hong Kong action, movies that were inspired by Hong Kong. They were obsessed with it, anime, all this sort of stuff. And that's what Albert Pyun was doing. And all they really did was they took what part of Albert Pyun's vision, and they were like, oh, there's something here and we could actually do it. And maybe with more time, money, talent, that's what the debate is. We're able to produce an iconic movie that changed cinema and, is seminal to like people with kind of around our age. And yet there's this other little movie that is arguably on the face of it a Terminator ripoff that was actually later ripped off to make The Matrix. And that's how movies work, by the way. I don't mean ripped off in a bad way. That's how art works. And that's how movies work, is somebody sees something or reads something or hears something and goes, ooh, and it inspires them, and then they innovate on it. And we have a whole generation of our favorite filmmakers. By the way, Christopher Nolan is one of them, and his brother certainly is, Jonathan Nolan, who have been heavily influenced by B movies. And if you actually watch any of Nolan's movies, any of them, and I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet, but any of the ones that are out pre-Oppenheimer, almost all of them are B movie plots. It's like, what if Stanley Kubrick directed a canon film? That's Christopher Nolan's career. It is what it is.
Yeah.
The reverse things in Tenet are straight up Phantasm. So many of the dream logic of Inception is Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Warriors.
Yeah.
And people like, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's just, whether consciously or unconsciously, there are these genre movies that permeate our culture, get in our heads, and then, can you turn them around and make sort of high cinema with them? Sure. But I guess the bottom line on this is, when we watch the Albert Pyuns of the world, you actually develop you become more familiar with the nuances of the language of cinema. That's the best way to put it.
Well, all of this, we should be learning and turning things and making it better and building on each other, right? That's the whole point. And when you talk about, you can take these things and make them high art, that's what Star Wars is. That's what Raiders of the Lost Ark is. But
100%.
The problem
100%.
is, a lot of people don't realize that those are pastiches, because they haven't watched the movies that inspired Lucas and Spielberg. It's the same thing with them. I know a lot of people think they're smart, like, oh, that's William Gibson, oh, this is Ghost in the Shell. But what you're talking about with the Albert Pyun isms from Nemesis in it, those are also things that have been sampled, and it makes sense because the whole rest of the movie is a pastiche. But the thing is, when I watched The Matrix after watching a bunch of Pyun movies, right, you're like, oh, I'm learning something. There's a new language that I wasn't familiar with before,
right?
Because I've gone out and because I've challenged myself, and I'm not just sitting here and just, oh, cyberpunk, I don't know what that is, but I know that it's in The Matrix. So that's all
right. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Any of us can go, oh, well, we know the talking points, right? Oh, well, Blade Runner, William Gibson, Cyberpunk, like, or whatever, fill in the blank, Lawrence of Arabia, Casablanca, this and that, John Ford. Like, we know the talking points, but there's a difference between that and actually like sitting down and watching a Sergio Leone film, watching High Plains Drifter, which I don't think is Leone, but anyways, watching High Plains Drifter, watching the neo westerns of Eastwood, and then watching Unforgiven.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then also watching like Shane. Watch Shane, then watch Eastwood, and then you go, well, holy shit, these Eastwood movies are really freaking violent. And then what you realize is that violence that was in the westerns, which is the superhero genre of its day, that was that dominant, ends up translating itself into the Schwarzenegger and Stallone movies, and now that's influenced through Italian cinema. But if we hadn't had spaghetti westerns and neo westerns, we never would have got Commando or Predator or these other movies, because the old school John Wayne western, guy gets shot in the gut, grabs his gut, falls over. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, the spaghetti westerns come along, the gun fires, and it's bam, there's a huge crack, and blood spurts out of a wound, and the guy slowly, painfully dies. And there's explosions and there's fire, but it's subdued compared to what the 80s would do. But that's the evolution of like violence on screen. Mm-hmm. And then you realize that grizzled character who would, he went from being the lone gunman, the gunslinger, to being the Vietnam veteran, to being the Iraqi war veteran, to being Wolverine, to, you can, like, you start to see like these tropes and these things. It's like the torch is always being passed down, and that's, you kind of, I don't know, just, you have to watch a lot of movies, including ones you don't like necessarily.
That's a big topping point on Twitter, is watch more movies. And a lot of people take offense to that because they're like, oh, I watch movies. It's like, yeah, but there's still so much to learn. It's like Unforgiven. It's my favorite Western, but the reason it's my favorite Western is because it's, first of all, it's a good solid script. Like it's a good movie.
Yes.
But what enhances the movie for me is I am so familiar with the Eastwood Westerns and everything. Yep. So it's a pastiche sort of all those built into one. And this is like the amalgam and the apex of Eastwood. And so that enhances.
It's almost like it's almost like that movie is the period at the end of the sentence of that era of Hollywood.
but if you don't watch those movies, you're not going to feel that. That's the problem. Yeah, Albert Pyun is not the greatest director. We'll talk about some of his mistakes, I guess, in Captain America, but you need to have this in order to appreciate things that come out. We're not knocking it when we say Nolan is taking B plots and making that's what it is. Like, but it's because we're learning and we're processing and we're building on what's come before. That's what people don't realize. You have to watch more movies in order to appreciate movies. It's kind of a
So let me boil this whole soapbox thing down. My whole soapbox is boil it all down and say this: watching more movies doesn't mean you will like quote unquote mainstream or popular movies less. I don't want that. I don't suggest that. I'm not suggesting you go watch a bunch of movies so that you don't like Top Gun Maverick as much as you did. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you actually might like Top Gun Maverick even more,
right?
If you understand the movies that inform Top Gun, if you understand the movie, or if you understand the movies that are informing that movie, or the Mission Impossible movies, or a James Bond movie, or even the MCU or DC, whatever. Like, all these movies exist in conversation with a larger scope of the history of film. And the more broadly you watch, up, down, in the middle, low budget, high budget, international, foreign, high art, low art, the more you sample, and it's impossible to watch everything, but the more you sample, the more stuff kind of recontextualizes in your mind. And I think you end up appreciating movies more.
Yeah.
All movies more. I've gone from somebody who didn't like Italian cinema, and I'm talking about like Italian ripoff movies and Italian horror and all that sort of stuff, to being somebody who so profoundly appreciates it. And I find that the more and more we go down this digital rabbit hole, the digital age, the more and more I appreciate a Fulci and a Bava, every version of Bava, Mario Bava, Roberto Bava. The more I appreciate a movie like Demons 2, which is a girl's birthday party that gets interrupted by demons taking over a luxury high rise. And there's some special effects of that movie that are done with smoke and lights, and there's some stuff with the TV and makeup effects, all this sort of stuff that is both simultaneously silly, cheesy, corny, terrifying, scary, creepy, weird, and ultimately impressive. And it's like, the more we get away from making those sort of movies, even like this 1990 original adaptation for the big screen theatrical major Hollywood release of Captain America, we probably won't go through it plot point by plot point, but it is the origin story more or less of Captain America, and it's not that much different than the Joe Johnston First Avenger movie. And I 100% understand, on looks alone, just looks, why Matt Salinger was selected. Because if you look at a picture drawing of Cap, Steve Rogers in the 80s, he either looks like Robert Redford, or he looks like, which is of course why again they ended up casting Robert Redford in a movie, because in a different generation Robert Redford would have been Steve Rogers 100%.
Yeah.
And so they cast him as the villain because he's the antithesis of Steve in Winter Soldier, which is one of the best movies in the MCU. And but again, would you know that if you didn't understand that Captain America in the 70s was basically based off of that actor? Probably not. So you don't understand the reference of him even being in the movie.
Yeah.
You're like, well, just why is this guy in this movie? Why is this great actor in this dog shit movie? Well, because that movie's in conversation with the fact that the Steve Rogers who's being adapted as Chris Evans is actually this guy.
Yeah.
It's actually Robert Redford. But if it's not Robert Redford, it's Matt Salinger. He looks like Captain America. The big problem is he looks like Captain America before he's Captain America. He's like a really strong, virile, handsome dude before he gets the vitamin rays. I think he's got polio. He's got a lip from polio. But that's it. Like now acting ability, what do they give Cap to do? It's mostly carjack people. He carjacks about a half a dozen people this movie. He lives Ned Beatty. What the hell is Ned Beatty doing? But Ned Beatty gets stranded in this movie 10 times before he dies. 10 times?
Yep.
The whole okay. What is interesting about this movie? I may be jumping ahead. I apologize.
No.
Is, and this is true of a lot of Pyun's work. You look at the movie, and he didn't write this one. He's just the director here. Stephen Tolkien directed or wrote this movie. And he was mostly a TV guy. A lot of Pyun's movies, especially the ones he writes, but most of his movies, you can kind of look at them and go, I can imagine what this movie would be if it were good. I don't mean that as a dig. I mean it as a compliment, because there are B movies and bad, like true B movies that are also bad. Because B doesn't mean bad. It just means it's not like a top tier film. It typically means it has a lower budget.
It's not
all
A
B
level.
movie was.
Right.
Yeah. It's a lesser release because they either were shown in double features. And so you had your A movie, which was what drew butts and seats, and a B movie, which was sort of you got it for the bargain of the price of the ticket. And they were typically shorter and more genre-esque. Either that, or they're also B movie theaters in B territory. So as movies were going, because they were basically traveled like via roadshow, so as markets opened to movies and movies came, just like stage productions do, and would leave New York and LA and go across the country, there were certain theater houses that were they were B movie theaters, and they typically got your first run lower tier movies, because this is like pre-multiplex days, because you have to remember most movie theaters had one screen. So pre-multiplex, you had A theaters and B theaters, and your A movie went to your A theater, which is typically your Palace Theater, and your B movies went to your smaller, kind of dumpier theaters, or drive-ins. So that's where the idea comes from. It's double feature. It's like, doesn't mean B as in bad. Anyway, there's your history lesson. So, but the thing about Pyun is, like, in comparison to a lot of direct-to-video movies or movies that aren't very good, like, you just watch it and you're incredulous. You just go, in what world was this ever going to work? The bones of this movie, and obviously that's all largely based on the comic books, again, they're repurposed for Joe Johnston's The First Avenger, and there's a lot of flourishes that are added to it, and a lot of creativity that's added to it. Cap is a propaganda piece. We got a lot more of the backstory, a lot more of his time in World War II, all this sort of stuff. But I look at the structure of this movie, like on paper, what it is, and I'm like, yeah, I could see where this was in conversation with Richard Donner's Superman. Obviously, that is the template from which this movie was written. Two boys in the 30s or 40s see Captain America save Washington, D.C. by redirecting a missile from the evil Red Skull, which then costs him his life. They think he's dead. Turns out he's just frozen on ice for half a century. And one boy grows up to be an all-American journalist, Ned Beatty, and the other boy grows up to be a liberal president who wants to save the environment. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, had we listened to Mr. President in 1990, maybe Canada wouldn't be on fire today, and I wouldn't be having asthma attacks walking outside my door 200 miles away. But it's like, we see these boys and they grow up, and like you get the sense of like it kind of wants to be like a movie in the 30s and the 40s. You kind of get that sense about it. Even when it gets to the 80s, it still feels almost like an action serial. Like, I think Pyun's style is he's trying to make it like an old action serial with semi-modern sensibilities. And that's kind of interesting. It's like this is a golden era of Cap sort of attempt to capture. But yeah. I've talked enough.
No, these are all things that we definitely, I definitely want to talk about that. The thing is, I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, I'm not super familiar with Albert Pyun. I've seen Sword and the Sorcerer. I haven't seen it recently. I know I saw it as a kid, and I remember the boobs and I remember the violence. Like, that's the thing you remember when you're
They're
a kid.
still there. Yeah.
Right. And so I think my memories of it, that's probably his most competent movie because he had the budget and it was a big hit, all the other stuff. I know I've seen Cyborg at a certain point, because
that's probably his most beloved movie.
Yeah, you have to check out Van Damme at a certain point, right?
But
Captain America was one of those where I kind of treated it as like an urban legend.
Yes.
like Roger Corman, Fantastic Four. So this was my first time watching it. Johnny, what about you? Was this your first experience with Captain America? And then I do want to talk about how it became a different Captain America.
Yeah, it was my first time last night. Never seen it before. Never heard much about Pyun, so it was a new experience for me.
And are you
sorry, Johnny?
Yeah. Do you think you have a good handle on what Pyun is as a filmmaker now? Watching
after this chat so far, yes.
So that's the thing, right? I mean, it's like the first note I have here is that the opening, when they deal with it's weird that they open in Italy, like it's Captain America, but they open in Italy, right?
They open with a tragic backstory for a sympathetic backstory for our non-sympathetic villain. Like, I don't mean to interrupt, but like the Red Skull is supposed to be more evil than Hitler.
Yeah.
Right? He's the guy that Hitler's like, boy, that guy's crazy. And that guy's a real fanatic. And they're like, no, let's open with a Inglorious Bastard style interrogation of the family. And where a child is stolen from his Jewish family, ripped of his identity, and turned into a Nazi super soldier. Like, that's a bold choice. And then he watches his family get gunned down in front of him, and then he's brainwashed. In effect, they make him the Winter Soldier. He becomes what Bucky would become in the MCU.
Right.
And yet and maybe that was, I don't know at what point the Winter Soldier storyline happened. Maybe that was like they combined the two. But it's like, you don't really have to give in this movie, based on this production value. Do you need to give your villain that much backstory? That's what I mean. The kernels, the subatomic particles, it's not visible. You need a electron microscope to be able to see it. But the kernels of an actual good film are here.
That's the note that I have. This opening sequence seems like it's a trial run for the opening of XMen in 2000.
That's a great reference,
right?
Like that's exactly right.
Yeah, Magneto in the the concentration camps, and how his powers manifest, and then that goes to the next scene where it shows him being tortured, and that I even wrote, oh, this is X-Men First Class, where you see the Kevin Bacon character. So that is obviously ingrained, and then later, it's so funny because it seems to move from piece to piece without there being any real depth to it. It just, here's what's happened, here's what happens, to the point where you see where Steve Rogers is turning into Captain America. It's the kernels for the first Avenger are all there. Like the beats are almost exactly
it's almost the exact same scene,
right? It's just the production values have just been enhanced. The other thing too is I don't know who Steve Rogers is even by the end of this movie. But the thing is they in Captain America: The First Avenger, 21 years later, they put in the effort.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between comic book movies then versus comic book movies now, is you just can't say, here's stuff that happens, you just make of it what you will, right? But there are literally scenes where they walk downstairs and they watch him be turned into Cap, and then there's the electric light show, and then there's the Doctor who gets shot. It's a lot, again, in First Avenger, it's a lot more graceful because meet this guy. It's like, oh, nice to meet you, Hail Hitler, blam, and then it's the staging is just so
but it's a lot of the same beats of the Doctor's
exactly.
don't forget who you are.
Yes.
If you get these powers, you've been chosen because you're a good man. Don't stop being a good man just because you got power. And it's like, oh shit, yeah. You took that's what I mean. You took the bones of this and then you went, okay, let's flesh it out. I think this movie is in the ilk, it's in the genetic line of Donner Superman. Because this, Lundberg and Johnny, but I always forget it, is that Donner Superman starts with a little boy. It starts with a play.
Yes.
like this imagination of a child reading the Action Comics #1 or whatever of Superman. And presumably this entire movie is in the imagination of this child. It's not bookended that way, but that's what it seems to be. Mm-hmm. Or is that Donner reading those books as a child, and then we go into his imagination of who Superman would be in the modern world? I don't know. But what it does is it contextualizes that entire movie, even though it is eventually it gets to contemporary times, which would be the late 70s. The whole thing is framed almost like a 30s screwball comedy a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's a pastiche of that. That's how it works. Even the way Margot Kidder speaks and she's an ace reporter who can't spell, and like it's all of this sort of like banter and all this sort of stuff. This seems to be kind of trying to capture that of like boys with decoder rings who are listening to radio plays and see a real live superhero, and it's his self-sacrifice then leads one to become an environmentally conscious president. Another one is a free speech loving, corruption exposing journalist, all this sort of stuff. The other thing it's in conversation with is Batman 89. Mm-hmm. Because if you think about Batman 89, whose backstory do we get?
Joker's. Yep.
Jack Napier's. The Joker didn't even have a backstory at that point, right? Mm-hmm. In the comic books, you could say, well, maybe he's the Red Hood, but really, there was no real backstory. That movie gave him a backstory. It's, well, we have to fill in that character and whatever. This movie is the same thing. Whose backstory do we get? We get Red Skull's backstory.
Yep.
Even though just like Nicholson, the rest of the movie is just going to be about chewing scenery. We spend the most of the time with like Jack's vanity and Jack's ego and Jack's having an affair with Mick Jagger's wife or girlfriend or whatever, and all this sort of stuff. Same thing here is, well, he's this little boy and he's in Italy and he's taken and then he just ends up being a guy chewing the scenery in makeup. Yeah. And so it's like, oh yeah, of course. And then you can see the lessons were learned, to your point, Lundy. Lessons were learned by the time we get to First Avenger. They were like, oh well, now here's the thing. If I were to say one thing, at least this introduction to the Red Skull might be better than the MCU's, because the MCU is just like yada yada yada, he's crazier than Hitler. Yeah. That's it. And it's like, we don't understand what makes him tick. Like why, like, he's in the cult shit. Okay, great. Who is he? Where does he come from? What, we don't know. This movie gives you an actual origin story. Maybe it's wrong-headed to do that in your Captain America movie, but they did it.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting too is, and Johnny, I want to get your input here, is like, for comic book movies in the 90s, I think the Captain America movie, this one kind of fits in with what comic book movies were like in the 90s. Like they weren't as accurate, or they weren't as empathizable. Like in this one, they don't bother. They just give you the beats. Like, oh, here's Cap's girlfriend. Like he's in love with her. Oh, here he is getting his powers. Oh, here he is fighting. It doesn't fill in the emotional gaps, right? And I even go back to Batman. I even go back to Batman Returns, which are nothing like the comics, right? It's like they were made by people that had never read a comic, is what it feels like.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with the history of Cap. I just thought it was very interesting that it tied in with the 2011 movie. But I mean, Johnny, does that, with comic book movies in the 90s, we've talked about this before, is that something that is a common thread for you, and is that something you noticed with those movies made during that time?
Well, I definitely notice what you're talking about, as far as like they didn't put in the effort in back then. They put a lot more work into it now. I think they do a lot better job nowadays, as far as just the structure, the storytelling, the characters, the backstories, just all the special effects. Everything looks tighter and cleaner, in my opinion. I'm not a huge comic book guy, comic movie fan, but I mean, I do enjoy them. But I would say that I definitely can tell that they didn't quite put in the work they needed to bring forth the product that it needed to be. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But Jason, this is what you're talking about. It's about taking what we've already done and making it better, or improving it, or adding things to it.
Okay. You want an example?
Yeah.
From this movie? In Winter Soldier, Zola ends up being in the old school SHIELD computer mainframe, whatever. What does he reveal? He reveals that Hydra has infiltrated SHIELD decades ago, And what it's been doing is it's been systematically controlling history through the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., to try to lead the world to the brink of war, to create a industrial military complex through which Hydra could control the world. Correct?
Yes. Yep.
The plot of this movie is when Steve gets de-thawed, is the Red Skull is assumed an identity as a Italian crime lord who leads a syndicate of global leaders, as a global cabal of world leaders, including people in the White House who have infiltrated. And they reveal that they've been purposely building the industrial military complex through the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, so that they can gain control over the world. And this president's peacenik, environmental friendly, sort of demilitarize the planet agenda is going to directly cut against this cabal, which isn't named Hydra, I don't think, because I don't think they can have those rights to, but is basically Hydra. Yep. It's Hydra. And so that same plot point, and almost there's a moment where they're sitting around the round table and they're giving the speech of like, we have control of the 20th century. And it's almost the exact monologue that Zola gives as the computer to Stephen Nat. I was like, I've heard this before. It's the same, but in one movie, it's goofy and boring. And in another movie, it's a compelling reveal. And then, oh, holy crap moment of my God, and so what's the difference? The word, here's the thing, Johnny Lumberg, the words aren't different. The monologue is beat for beat the same. The idea isn't any different, is it? Is there any difference in the ideas between what's going on here and Hydra infiltrating the U.S. government and global governments? It's the same plot point. It's exact same.
It's exactly the same. Yeah.
It feels and plays completely differently.
Right.
And what's the difference?
Well, Johnny talking about too, the effort is the part. Yep. So they turn him into Captain America and they give him some kind of weird synthesizer kind of thing. But when the first time that I really started laughing was when he dons the helmet on top of his mask. And I think I laughed for like 5 minutes because number one, they haven't put in the work for that moment to land. All of a sudden, he's just got a helmet on over his Captain America face. Correct. And I was like, I have no connect. But in First Avenger, when he does that, and again, similar scene, he jumps off the plane, right? Parachutes off, right?
Yep.
You feel it emotion. It's built to that. And this one, it's just another thing that happens. And so that's what you're just talking about ones and zeros. You're talking about, you have everything the same on the paper, but you take somebody who, no knock to Pyun, but you take somebody with actual talent and an actual budget and you say,
and time.
That's
time. You have months to film as opposed to like, well, here's 3 weeks, get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. So even Ned Beatty showing up, I'm like, well, I guess they're going for the Superman temp. Like you've got that connection, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about all these things, and we've got the all his like signature stuff with the fast editing and the kind of the inept. So what are if we wanted to talk about some of our favorite scenes? Jason, you talked about the Cabal, and the Cabal scene, I was like, this is the Naked Gun. At the beginning of the first Naked Gun, when he's meeting with Ayatollah and with Gorbachev and all this.
Yes.
And then, but it really reminded me though of in Naked Gun 2.5, where it has like the Mannheim, and they meet with all the people and Robert Goulet's there. Yeah. But that's playing as a parody, and it's supposed to be funny, like interesting. Like introduce these people, and it's the acronym of kaboom or whatever, and so it's supposed to be funny. In this one, they're treating it like dead serious, so it makes it even funnier. To me, I don't know. That was so the thing with Cap. I laugh at the helmet over his mask, and then the Cabal thing is just, and then Cap's first adventure. The note I have here is that he's terrible at his job. Like he hasn't been tested.
Yes.
And then he gets seen like the first thing, and he throws his shield in, which is obviously in some shots a plastic shield.
100%.
It's just so funny. I mean, but what are some of your other favorite scenes? I mean, Jason, if like, what are some of the things watching it recently or whatever, what are some things that you really liked or enjoyed in this?
I'm not interested in my favorite scenes. I'm interested in Johnny.
Yeah, I wanted to go over there, but yeah.
What's your favorite scene of this movie
Favorite
you had to
scene?
watch because of
I'll
me?
tell you the one thing that threw me for a loop is I don't know why there's a grand piano on top of that cliff there at the end. I was like, why is there a piano there? And it just like I couldn't piece it together. I couldn't figure it out. And here's the thing: when this movie started, I was kind of on board with it at first. I wanted to like it. I wanted to enjoy it. And for the most part, I can say I did. Honestly, I had fun. And that's the thing about bad movies. Like you were saying about appreciating all movies. I can appreciate a bad movie. I knew it was bad almost right away. And I was like, okay, it's going to be bad. Well, let's try to have fun with this. And so I just tried to have fun and watch it and enjoy it. And so when I find those things like the helmet or like, you know, the rocket almost missing the White House or the piano on the top of the cliff, it was like, it was silly and stupid, but I just kind of laughed at it and had fun with it. You know what I mean? Like, okay, this is what they're doing. So I just kind of like went along for the ride, you know?
I had that same experience. Like I was laughing a lot and I don't know what happened, but I think it's the moment again, beat for beat from Winter Soldier, when, like you said, Jason, they go down into the bunker, right, where his experiments were done. They find the diary without even trying. It's like, oh, I'm just going to look in this one drawer. Oh, here it is. I found it. It's a diary. And then you have the guys show up. I think they show up in different cars. One's a Mercedes Benz. So I'm like, oh, this is obviously the producer's car, right, that they bought.
Yes.
But they go down and there's a Chinese, and I'm like, oh, it's going to be some kung fu, which does happen. But I think it was around that time where that whole scene is so ineptly shot that I couldn't tell anything that was happening. When he's doing the karate moves, I'm like, I can't see what he's doing. How many guys are there? Where are they in relation to each other?
Don't you think that's the point, though? I think the point, though, like a Pyunism, if I could give one Pyunism is Pyun either he tends to over edit his movies, which is really odd because he doesn't edit his own films. So, and he has edited a few of his films, but I don't know if he was heavily involved with his editors, because he's got a movie called Vicious Lips, which is indiscernible. It starts off really odd. He does a lot of really strange stuff. And it's kind of in this connected universe of movies that are all kind of happening in the same same kind of connected universe, that's based off of a noir detective comedy story set in space post-apocalyptically called Radioactive Dreams. And I think there's like two characters, and I could get this wrong, but one of them's like Dashiell and the other one's Hammett, and they're doing like they're trying to find their fathers, and they're detectives, all this sort of stuff. That movie almost doesn't exist anymore, but it ends up creating this world that like 3 more movies take place in. And the nightclub, the noir sort of Rick's Place kind of thing, is called Radioactive Dreams. So Vicious Lips takes place in the world, the cinematic universe of that. But that movie ends up being edited in such a way. He's got another one that was a mainstream movie called Dangerously Close, which actually isn't bad until the editing gets so disjointed. You're like, what the hell is this? It's like an 80s teen thriller, high school. Reagan kids are basically turn out to be Nazis and are trying to get rid of poor people, minorities out of their school system. And it's a great premise, and it's a decent start to the movie. And his opening is incredible, and the visuals are incredible, and it's very well directed. And then the editing, about halfway through, gets so crazy you have no idea what's happening. In Cyborg, you have Van Damme, who, if you're going to put Van Damme on screen, especially in that area of his career, it's not to read dialogue, it's to kick.
Yeah. Yep.
And he cuts the shit out of every kick. And some of the kicks, Van Damme lands flush on these stunt guys' faces. And then we just chop, 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 chop. And I have no idea why. And his thing is, it's chopped from a wide shot. So that means he had the camera in the proper position, framed it correctly. Van Damme hit his mark. The stuntman hit his mark, and it's still edited to shit. But if he's going to do that with Jean-Claude Van Damme, or allow his editor to do it, let's put it like that, I have no doubt that he was like, cut all the way around
Yeah.
Matt Salinger throwing punches,
Yeah.
because this guy physically, outside of his face and his chin, is entirely wrong for Captain America.
He's like a literal block of wood with arms.
He really is.
Yeah.
He's got a great jawline, much better than Kurt Russell's kid. But I would say that Wyatt Russell looks just as ridiculous in the Captain America costume in the MCU as this guy does, without the rubber ears.
But that's done ironically in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, like as kind of a point to say.
I don't know that I took it ironically. I thought it was embarrassed. I think that's one of the worst things that's ever been produced. I honestly, I think Falcon and Winter Soldier is worse than this movie.
Interesting. Yeah, I couldn't finish it, but
because this movie is so bad it almost has a charm to it.
It almost, and that's the thing I was talking about. When it gets to that scene, right? I think that's when my brain started turning on it, and I started getting angry at the movie because it wasn't giving me anything that I needed to proceed, right?
Characterization, pathos.
And it gets to the end, and there's little shots of Cap. Like there's no tension in any of the scenes. Like you cut, and it's like the cars racing, and then they kind of are jogging away from it, and you see two kids on the street, and they kind of. There's no real tension to any of those scenes. And so I wasn't really laughing, but I was just like, what?
I would say the movie has a decent low budget opening. It's like, okay, have you seen First Avenger? Like the first 20 minutes of this movie is like, what if you made First Avenger on a shoestring budget?
Yeah.
And so you watch it, you're like, okay, this isn't actually that bad. It's kind of it's a bad movie, but it's not horrible. It's kind of endearing.
Like Johnny was saying,
yeah. But then we get to the middle of the movie, and that to me is where it really is saggy, and because we can't go to Queens, we can't go to Brooklyn, we can't go to New York, so we reset this whole thing in Redondo Beach, California, a place synonymous with Steve Rogers. Redondo Beach, California. And it was shot, it was storyline that takes place there because that's where they shot this movie.
Yeah.
And like you said, that car is the producer's car. That house is probably where Matt Salinger lived. Like it just has that feel to it. You get your Melinda Dillons and your Darren McGavins who are coming in for a cup of coffee, basically. To just get a paycheck. Ned Beatty's in it longer, but it's like at the halfway, not even halfway, at the quarter mark, the movie becomes about Ned Beatty trying to track down the rumored Captain America and meeting him on a Canadian highway, and then him leaving Ned Beatty stranded in the woods, which ought to have probably gave him PTSD flashbacks. But over and over again, he steals so many different cars, and then eventually gets back to Redondo Beach, and just like the middle of this is dreadfully boring, and then the end is so ineptly done. And the Red Skull gets knocked off a cliff with a piano on it for some reason by a plastic shield, and it's really hilarious. Although at the beginning, when that rocket launch sequence happens and Cap throws his shield, like you said, without any training or testing or anything, and just goes right to immediately facing the Red Skull and throws that shield, Red Skull reaches out and grabs it with his hand, and then the exact shot is later duplicated by Winter Soldier.
Yep.
And you're just going, shit, again. You cannot tell me that and obviously some of these things are taken from panels of comic books and whatnot, but you cannot tell me that somebody along the way, be it the Russos, be it Johnston, be it the screenwriters, be it the McFeelys of the world, did not watch this movie and be like, what if we did this but good?
Yeah.
What if we did this but cool?
Yeah.
And they did. So
right. Well, that's tying in with we need to know where we've been in order to understand where we are, right?
Yeah.
And it's all kind of feeds into each other, and I think that's important. And I guess if we were to kind of put a nice tidy bow, because we could go beat by beat, and but it's something that I think you need to experience yourself. Like it's on Amazon Prime. If you have that, just go ahead and check it out. And
YouTube.
And anywhere, right? It's easily available,
yes.
Right? And it even, again, I get that they're trying to ape Superman, but when they try to do Cap turning to the camera, like for the final shot, I think I yelped.
Awful.
I'm like, whoa,
Awful.
don't do that. That's not a good look, right?
Awful.
But even that's trying to feed into this. It's just,
And I get it. I think with the piano, they're trying to make a statement that that's where Red Skull's whole personality comes from, because they're listening to a minuet or something on the phonogram or whatever, right?
When when he's traumatized.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Yes,
and
yes,
I get that. But the
Yeah.
fact that it's just up, it doesn't make sense. I get what they're trying to say, but it doesn't
Yeah.
say it in a way that's like, oh, that's actually meaningful. And it's like Johnny's reaction. It's like, why is there a piano? That's the first thing that because it's just very shoddily done and shoddily realized. And that's
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I think that it's really easy to watch a movie like this, and there's a million reviews of this movie, and most of them consist of just let's roast this movie. And I didn't really want to do that in your guys' show, one, because everybody's already done that.
Right,
and
right.
That's sort of redundant.
It's easy.
It's at this point it's easy because all the jokes have already been told.
Right,
If we were the first people out the gate and we rediscovered this thing, then sure. But when 10 million people on YouTube have done it, it's been done, right?
Yeah.
So I'm more interested in going, okay, what else is there to say about this movie? But I think we've done that. I think we've done it semi-successfully. Hopefully your audience agrees. But for the life of me, I cannot figure out why they sewed rubber ears into this guy's costume. He has ears. I saw an interview with him once, and he was like, I have no idea. I went to when he did the test screen or whatever, it was just the cowl. It was just the Captain America cowl. And I think they got rid of the feathers too, right? He doesn't have, or does he? He doesn't have the feathers.
No.
Does he have the A?
Yeah, he has the A.
A is there, yeah.
Yeah, but he doesn't have the feathers on the side of his head. And when he originally put the original cowl on, it just had holes where his ears went through. And so, but somewhere between there and production, they didn't like the way his ears looked. And how the mask, the cowl kind of sat on him with the ears. They thought it looked stupid and they didn't like it. So they had rubber ears sewn onto the outside of the cowl that sit on top of his real ears. That's not a solution. If your problem is this guy looks fucking ridiculous on camera, right? This outfit looks silly. The solution is not put rubber ears on it. Put rubber ears on top of his real ears. That's not the solution.
No.
With the first time you get the dailies back of that look, do you not just go, oh boy, we gotta scrap this? And the thing is, maybe they did, but they're like, we've got 2.5 weeks to shoot this entire movie in Hungary that we're pretending is Italy. And so it looks like garbage, but we got to keep rolling with it.
It's a choice.
Yeah, it is a choice. Now, my final thought on it is, I don't think this movie is as bad as the GIFs make it out to be.
Yeah,
I think it's more boring. Than there's so many GIFs of the thumbs up and that and all that and the rubber ears. There's known elements of this movie, but when you really watch it, it's not like a Samurai Cop where it's like every beat of this movie is hilarious because it's so inept.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of sluggish. It's more of oh, well, this is a low budget Captain America, and then it becomes a very sluggish All the President's Men with Cap hijacking cars and leaving Ned Beatty stranded in the woods repeatedly. And then it goes into pure schlock at the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's Captain America.
Well, the thing is, I don't think this is the worst comic book movie ever made. And the reason for that,
it really isn't. It really isn't, actually.
My reasoning is that they were trying. They thought this was good. They weren't purposely, if I were to pick a worst, I think Catwoman is my least favorite comic book movie of all time because they were purposely setting out to make a bad movie. And it it makes it worse. And it has the same editing problems that this one has, except it's again, it's hard to say, but I think this one, they thought they were doing a good job, and so I can't fault it for that. And they were just working with what they had, right? If you
That's
have
the issue. Yeah.
if you have everything available for like Catwoman,
Yep.
and that's the
Yep.
movie that you made,
Yep.
I'm pissed off at that. It's like you're wasting my time. This one, at
Yep.
least, there's an innocence to it, and they're trying. I mean, Johnny, is that how
Well,
you categorize it?
Yeah, I would say it's a good bad movie. But it kind of reminded me of how I felt when I watched Flash Gordon. When I saw that, I thought they were trying really hard to make a really good movie, and I just hated it. So I kind of felt the same way. Like they're trying to make a good movie, but it's just it's a good bad movie.
Yeah, that's the camp is an issue there, obviously. And so so this it's a fun time. You can at least have fun with it, right? But it's like I said, like we're talking, it's not the worst thing ever made. I think Albert Pyun he thought he was doing a good job. I think that's what I don't think he was ever negative Nancy about it, even on his deathbed. Like they were giving him positives, right? Like his wife was like sending messages. And so that's what they were doing. And so he was like, oh, people do appreciate my work. And there is some joy to get out of these movies.
What's so interesting about Pyun is when you read interviews, because he's did a bunch of them before he passed away. He was a realist. He was very realistic about the sort of movies that he made. And what he would say about himself is that he always had more ambition than he had time or money or resources. And then he would say, and maybe because I was overly ambitious, the movie suffered because of that, but I'd rather be overly ambitious and fail than do what I know is just like safe, because I don't have very much money, so I shouldn't try to do that, because then to his point, you don't make anything interesting, and he'd rather at least try to make something interesting. So I would say, guys, I don't know that Pyun thought he was making a good movie. I think Pyun was trying to make the biggest, most ambitious superhero movie he could make on the least amount of money that you could give somebody to make an ambitious superhero movie. And the result is this. I don't know that I don't think he's a supremely talented director. I think he's directed a few films, maybe 2 or 3, where you actually see some promise. And I think if maybe he hadn't directed 5 films a year every year for 30 years and slowed down and taken more time, and quite frankly, as an Asian person, been allowed to enter the film industry. He was always at the periphery of the film industry because people like him were not being hired to direct movies, and they sure as hell were not being allowed in to direct or assistant direct or second unit direct superhero movies. So part of his story is he's an outsider because the system doesn't like outsiders. It doesn't want people who have ambition. It wants people who can produce a product under budget, under time, and make $1 billion. And back then it would have been make $100 million or $200 million. That was never going to be him. He was always going to put all the money on the screen that he could. Give me $3 million. I'm going to spend that $3 million. I'll make 4 movies out of it if I have to. We're going to make movies, and I'm going to do my damnedest to be as ambitious as possible. And his ambition typically exceeded his ability, his talent, and his resources. If we have any problem in comic book movies today, it is a lack of ambition.
Yep, absolutely.
There's just no ambition.
Yeah.
So I look at something like this and I go, I'm with you. At least it's earnest.
He was trying, right? He was trying.
Yes, right.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And so, so that's at least something, right? So, it's weird because this is like a weird counterbalance to the other 90s movies we've been doing, because those are movies we're in love with, and this is kind of funny taking a movie that's bad. But again, finding something in here. Jason, just to wrap up here, every time I have a conversation with you, or every time I listen to one of your episodes, I end up sitting afterwards and just in silence and pontificating about what was discussed. Something is different.
when I come out of these conversations or when I listen to your episodes, right?
Yeah.
It changes the way I appreciate movies. It changes the way that I look at criticism. It changes the way that I approach movies or talk about them. And so that's what I look for in great movies. I want to be changed. And Johnny and I have talked about this. When I walk out, I want to be a different person. I just don't want to be that was a fun 2 hours. Let's go see I want to be able to be different. And so I don't know if that's your goal, Jason, with Binge Movies, and I've said something like this before, but if that is your goal, then bravo, you're doing terrific work, because every time I talk or I listen, I'm different. And so that's, again, with conversations or podcasts, that's something that we definitely should be striving for as podcasters. So,
well, I would say you're a deeply disturbed individual for saying that, but I've heard that from more than one person.
Yeah. And every time I get more deeply disturbed.
Yeah. I know, but I that is a common thing that I do hear from people. I hear that quite a bit from other podcasters in the same space as us. You're the only one who will say it publicly, but I do get the DMs from people and emails and whatnot, and so I really do appreciate that. It is part of the goal, without sort of going on about myself, but part of the goal is like with this episode, everything, the roasting of Albert Pyun and Captain America has been done to death. And so many of the ways that we talk about movies, when we talked about it earlier in this conversation, of like, we all know the talking points.
Yeah.
So why just regurgitate them? Why not just like think differently and have different thoughts and think a little bit more deeply about it and have a good time while you're doing it? There's a real weird sense of humor that we have over at Binge Movies, and there's some real fun conversations, and we laugh, and it can be very crass and very vulgar and very bawdy and very strange and dark and all this sort of stuff. So it isn't just like heady movie talk, but it's trying to be like, what if we're both of those things? What if you could have a relaxed, funny conversation that is also kind of intellectually engaging? Because at least when I started the show, I didn't see very much of that. I saw like there's the funny, entertaining movie podcast, and most of those were like dunking on bad movies. And there was like the really thoughtful ones, but there really wasn't, that I knew of. There probably were, but that I could discover kind of something that was both, and that's what we've tried to be. That's what we've tried to build the show into, and so people say that is happening for them, that they're laughing, they're thinking differently. They've cried, they've whatever, and they're like, okay, great. That means that the show is successful, even though nobody's listening. So,
well, we're listening, so that's what really matters. So, yeah,
thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And again, thank you in quotes for bringing this movie to us. I'm glad at least I was able to finally get it off my bucket list. But if you could let everybody know what you're up to, let everybody know how to find you and how to get involved in Binge Movies.
Yeah, typically we rank a minimum of 5 films. That's the average, 5 films per episode. Our episodes are a little bit longer because we don't just rank them. We have in-depth conversations about them before we rank them or score them or review them. It's myself and a guest, usually someone like a Johnny or a Darren or a film fan, film fanatic, filmmaker, film critic, either am pro, we run the gambit. And then those culminate in what we call Last Movie Standing, which is, if you like professional wrestling, pay-per-views, and serious movie debates about Casablanca, we are the show for you. You can find us on all of your podcast apps, all your favorite ones. We're on Patreon, patreon.com/binge movies. If you want to follow us on social media, as long as Twitter exists, it's @binge movies. Letterboxd is @binge movies. Instagram is @binge movies lives. And I would guess Threads will be @binge movies live. So just follow us there. And just appreciate you guys having me on and letting me blather for a very long time about a director nobody cares about and a movie nobody likes.
Well, again, Jason, anytime, and I always welcome these. You call it blather, but I call it opening my mind, and I love just sitting here. I could listen to you call me the villain in Binge Movies all day. I mean, I love it. as long as I'm involved. And so that's what we appreciate about you. So yeah, we'll definitely have you back. And again, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Welcome.